All right, let's get into it. Today, we are wrestling with one of history's most fascinating and, frankly, most troubling figures. This is a name who was supposed to be the vicar of Christ on earth, but who lived a life that would make a warlord blush. We are talking, of course, about Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI. And that's really the question we're trying to answer here. How did a single pope manage to literally draw a line that split the globe in two, while his actions at home helped shatter the unity of Western Christianity forever? It sounds impossible, right? So let's dive in. And this is the paradox at the heart of the man. On the one hand, you have the vicar of Christ. He holds the holiest office in Christendom, the direct spiritual link to St. Peter. But on the other hand, you have a warlord, a brilliant schemer, and a father who used his own children like chess pieces in a massive game of power. To even begin to understand this guy, we have to start with his reputation, which is, to put it lightly, absolutely infamous. We're not just talking about a controversial pope. For a lot of people, he is the poster child for a corrupt pope. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? It gets right to the heart of who he was. Look, Alexander never really pretended to be a saint. For him, being pope wasn't just a spiritual calling. It was the ultimate power base. It was the best family business in all of Europe, and he was the CEO. So let's put on our prosecutor hats and build the case against him. And let me tell you, the evidence is just overwhelming. We are talking about a level of corruption that was shocking even for the often cynical world of Renaissance Italy. And to understand how he got to the top, you have to know this word, simony. It's basically the sin of buying a holy office. It was a huge deal, a total betrayal of everything the church was supposed to stand for. And for Rodrigo Borgia, well, it was just business as usual. So yeah, this is how he became pope. It wasn't because of his piety, it wasn't some theological brilliance, it was a hostile takeover. He promised other cardinals land, titles, and, I'm not making this up, he literally sent mules loaded with silver to their front doors to buy their votes. And this number, what do you think that represents? Well, that is the minimum number of children he's known to have fathered. Just let that sink in. This is the Pope, the head of a church that demands celibacy from its priests. He wasn't just breaking the rules, he was openly flaunting them. And the list just goes on and on. He made his teenage son, Cesare, a cardinal, even though Cesare had absolutely zero interest in being a priest. He hosted legendary orgies right there in the Vatican. He ruthlessly crushed his critics, like the preacher Savonarola. And he openly kept a mistress so famous that her brother, who he also made a cardinal, got the nickname Cardinal Petticoat. It was a constant stream of scandal. Okay, so he was a terrible priest. Case closed, right? Well, this is where the story gets really complicated, because if you stop there, you miss the other half of the man. For all his sins, Alexander VI was an unbelievably effective political leader. So let's make the case for him, judging him not as a priest but as a Renaissance prince. You have to understand the world he was operating in. The Vatican had immense wealth, sure, but Italy was a political viper's pit. It was just a messy patchwork of warring city-states, constantly making and breaking alliances, and always at risk of being invaded by big powers like France and Spain. To survive in that world, a pope had to be a player. And Alexander was a grandmaster. And he wasn't playing alone. He and his son, Cesare, were one of history's most powerful political teams. Think of them as the brains and the brawn. Alexander was the master diplomat, the guy who could skillfully build a coalition to kick the French army out of Italy. And Cesare? Cesare was the muscle, a brilliant and totally brutal general who went out and conquered a secure state for the papacy in central Italy. He was so good at it, in fact, that he became the main inspiration for Machiavelli's famous Guide to Power, The Prince. But everything he did in Italy, all the scheming and the battles, it almost pales in comparison to his single most significant act as a statesman, an act that literally redrew the map of the world. So, picture this. The year is 1493. Columbus has just gotten back from his voyage, and all of a sudden the two great naval superpowers of the day, Spain and Portugal, are on a collision course. They both want to claim these new lands across the Atlantic, and it looks like a massive European war is about to break out. So what happens? Alexander steps in. Not as a priest, but as a global arbiter. He basically takes out a map of the world and, with all the authority of the papacy, just draws a line right down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Spain gets everything to the west, Portugal gets everything to the east. And this decision gets formalized in the famous Treaty of Tordesillas.
The impact of this one single line is absolutely staggering. I mean, first, he stopped a major war from happening. Second, he created the basic blueprint for how the Americas would be colonized for centuries. And third, well, if you've ever wondered why they speak Portuguese in Brazil while almost all their neighbors speak Spanish, this is it. It all goes back to a line drawn on a map by a corrupt pope in Rome. Wild, right?
But every action has a reaction, and Alexander's incredible political success came at an enormous cost to the very institution he was supposed to be leading. And this is his unintended and maybe his most destructive legacy. When it comes down to it, you just can't separate the brilliant statesman from the corrupt pope. They were two sides of the same coin. His skill as a ruler was fueled by the exact same ambition and ruthlessness that made him a spiritual disaster. To save the papal states, he basically had to sacrifice the papacy's moral authority. And this timeline just lays it all out there. Alexander's reign made this level of papal corruption feel normal, and it disgusted people all over Europe. Now look at the dates. Just 14 years after he dies, Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to that church door. You know, the fuse for the Reformation had been lit for a while, but Alexander basically came along and poured gasoline all over it. And this is really the verdict from a lot of historians. The widespread anger, the disgust with popes like Alexander, it created the perfect, fertile ground for reformers. People were desperate for a version of Christianity that wasn't all about power politics and poison and scandal. His papacy wasn't the only cause of the Reformation, not by a long shot, but it was a massive catalyst that helped tear Western Christianity apart. Which brings us to our final thought. And it's a lesson that's just as relevant for us today as it was 500 years ago. The story of Alexander VI is a cautionary tale. He saved the papacy as a political power, but in doing so, he pretty much hollowed out its soul. And it forces us to ask a really important question. When a leader puts their own personal ambition ahead of the mission of the institution they lead, what is the ultimate long-term cost?